Okay, so let's move on to oral sex. Back when Bill Clinton was being um, I can't remember the word for when the president is being sort of like held to trial and possibly isn't going to be president anymore. Impeached. That's the word I'm looking for. When he was being impeached, we had, a lot of nightly newscasts and things on the radio and stuff like that where they were talking about the fact that Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky had engaged in oral sex in the Oval Office. And a lot of parents were really distressed that they were going to have to talk to their children about oral sex. And so a lot of parents settled on telling their kids that oral sex is when you talk about sex. Oral sex is not when you talk about sex. If your parents told you that, it's because they didn't want to have to deal with it. There are two main, things that you can do with your mouth that is sexual, putting it on someone else's genitals. One is called cunnilingus, and that's when you put your mouth on the vulva, so the female genitalia. I got this picture off the internet, and it's awesome because look at the date of the lifespan of the artist. So he had to have produced this sometime in the 1800s, maybe the very early 1900s. One of the first things that people did in art after drawing, pictures of the animals that they might be hunting or tracing their own hands on cave walls was they started drawing pictures of sex acts. So it's not surprising that, even in the Victorian era of the late 1800s, there were, these kind of early, this would have been considered pornography. Even though you can't really see what's going on or anything, this would have been considered pornography, and it would have been illegal at the time that this was produced. We'll talk about that more when we get to the final chapter of this text. All right, so cunnilingus is oral sex performed on a woman, and then fellatio is oral sex performed on a man. Or in this picture, what kind of looks a lot like a little boy to me, but maybe Picasso just, he was an abstract artist, so he was doing sort of an impressionistic thing, but that looks like a little boy to me, but who am I to judge? So fellatio is oral sex performed on a man. Of course, you can do it simultaneously. So again, a nice little line drawing. This one's, again, really old line drawing, and this one's a lot more explicit. From I don't know, the late 18th century into the 19th century. I mean, this is some old, pornographic material that people probably passed around in little cards and kept hidden. And like I said, this stuff was illegal back at the time all three of these things were drawn. Picasso was in Europe, so maybe it wasn't illegal there. I'm not sure about the European laws and when they were changed. Anyway, so those are the correct terms for what we're talking about. Now, there are some people who object to oral sex. So why? Well, of course, hygiene. It is kind of ironic that the recreational areas are so close to the waste treatment areas, right? So a lot of people are worried that they might, that it's not hygienic, that it's an unhealthy thing to be doing. And, it can be. I mean, there is bacteria that can be in the genital area. It could be moved from the rectal area. It could be moved from the vagina into the the opening of the vagina area. It could be moved from the urethra. I mean, there can be bacteria, and that's true. Modern times, we shower so frequently, and we're probably too squeaky clean in certain ways. So, with proper cleansing and stuff, it's probably not as big of an issue. Some people are anxious about either performing oral sex or receiving oral sex. Some people are worried when they are the performer. They're like, what if I'm not doing it right? What if my partner's not enjoying it? Maybe are they going to be able to tell that I really don't know what I'm doing? For women who are performing oral sex on a man, one of their biggest worries is gagging. So these are performance-related anxieties. For the person who's receiving oral sex, they're anxious sometimes about seeming like they're selfish, like they aren't, there's not a reciprocity in the relationship. And so a lot of times people who are worried about that will say, well, let's always just, do mutual oral sex, something like that. They feel bad sort of like laying back and enjoying it. And in fact, maybe can't enjoy it because of that. Some people think it's sinful, that it's non-procreative, and so it's not something that you're supposed to be doing. And, for some of you, you might be thinking that's a really old-fashioned attitude, but there are certain religious beliefs and people who subscribe to those religious beliefs who really believe that, I shouldn't be doing, sexual behaviors unless I want to have children. And then other people think it's sinful because they say it's unnatural, that it's not something that humans should be doing. It's, humans should be having penile, vaginal sex, and that's it. For people who think this is sinful, they oftentimes think, a penis in a rectum would be sinful, or any other object in the vagina would be sinful. So a lot of times it's a lot of things that they think are unnatural. I put unnatural in quotation marks because usually the word natural means that it's something that you would do without having to be taught. Right? Things come naturally to you, right? So that means I didn't have to be trained or whatever. So I thought I'd share with you. Other animals seem to do it. I mean, now this is, these are some bonobo monkeys. If you know bonobo chimps, they're actually chimps. If you know anything about them, they're very uninhibited. They do pretty much, if it feels good, they do it. They do it with whoever is there. They don't worry about anything. And so to say it's unnatural kind of means we shouldn't see it among animals, and we do see it among animals. So probably it's not that it's unnatural. I think, if you're going to say that it's sinful, you probably have to focus in on the more on the idea that humans shouldn't be doing stuff like that because we're humans or something like that. That would probably be the better argument than to say it's unnatural. Okay, now one of the things I wanted to touch on is a lot of people misconstrue the relationship between oral sex and sexually transmitted infections. Now we're going to talk about this again when we get to sexually transmitted infections, but I just really wanted to point out that any place where there's a pink box, you can actually contract that type of STI through fellatio or cunnilingus. It might matter whether you're giving or receiving. It looks like mostly, with the exception of HIV, it looks like mostly you would be at higher risk of contracting an STI if you're the one who's performing the oral sex rather than receiving it. Syphilis, you can contract through receiving fellatio if the person actually has syphilis in their mouth already. But that's fairly rare. So we're going to talk about these infections more in another chapter, but I just wanted to show you, I mean, it's like almost all of them. Some of them say rare next to them, but almost all of them, if you're performing oral sex, you run the risk of contracting a sexually transmitted infection. Okay. How about anal stimulation? Analingus is basically like oral sex, but on the rectum. Now I thought I'd share with you the risks of contracting sexually transmitted infections through analingus. And you see that, hepatitis, herpes simplex virus 1, which is HSV1, and then syphilis are risky, but not really clear. If you look at the ones that are the green boxes with the question marks, they're thinking they're probably okay. You probably wouldn't get it through that. And then the white, they're like, we really don't know. We really don't know on HPV. And HPV, if a person has genital warts around their anus and you perform analingus, then you definitely can pick up the virus that has been shed. Now the question is, could that virus land somewhere where you could contract it? It needs to be on your genitals. It could be in your eyes. Yeah. So you could contract things through analingus. Anal intercourse, of course, is penetrating the rectum with the penis. And so here we have, looking at the x-axis, men on the left and women on the right, and then looking at the bars, the burgundy are people who have vaginal intercourse with the opposite sex. In the rose-colored bars, we have people who have oral sex with people of the opposite sex. In the royal blue bars, we have people who have anal sex with the opposite sex. And then in the light blue bars, we have people who have any type of sex with the same sex. And we see sexual behavior across the lifetime among men and women. These are people who are, at the time of the questioning, which was between 2006 and 2008, they were between 25 and 44 years old when they were asked whether they've ever done any of these things ever. And so 97% of the men and 98% of the women said that they had had vaginal intercourse with the opposite sex. 90% of the men and 89% of the women said that they'd had oral sex with a member of the opposite sex. And then 44% of the men and 36% of the women reported having had anal sex with someone of the opposite sex. And then we see 6% of men said that they'd ever done anything sexually with somebody of the same sex, and 12% of women who said that they'd done something sexually with someone of the same sex. What I was interested in for this chart was the anal sex with the opposite sex, because we really can't parse out from this chart the rate of anal sex with somebody of the same sex for men. So we're just looking at the heterosexual people who reported that they had had anal sex with somebody of the opposite sex. And so when I first showed this chart last time I taught this class in person, the students were a little surprised, especially after I showed you the Kinsey scale at the very beginning of class and told you it's 10 to 20% of people who report that they've had anal sex. So this number looks a little bit high compared to what like other studies have shown. But it's becoming more common, and a lot of researchers think that it has to do with the prevalence of anal sex on the internet, and people are seeing it as something that's more viable. Back in 1992, when I first taught this class, when I was still in grad school, students literally believed that the only people who had anal sex ever would be gay men, and some of them literally believed that having anal sex could generate HIV. So a lot has changed in 25 years in our knowledge and attitudes about anal sex. So it's become much more common. I don't know if these numbers are generalizable to the rest of us, but those are but it has become more common. Now, there are things that we need to worry about with anal intercourse. If a person penetrates the anus with anything, fingers, toys, or a penis, whatever that object is should now not be placed into a mouth or into a vagina, because those, you can transfer the bacteria from the actual, we aren't just talking about analingus here where you're just talking about the outside. We're talking about actually penetrating and potentially picking up bacteria and then transferring it into other places where that bacteria maybe doesn't have any good bacteria that could fight it off. And so you can get E. coli, and you can get bacterial vaginosis and other things that can happen. You can get hepatitis from transferring the bacteria of the rectum into the mouth. And so these are serious concerns. Some of the stuff that you see on anal sex acts on the internet, you'll see people having anal sex and then immediately performing fellatio on that same bare penis. That is not recommended. That is not a healthy thing to be doing, because you could so easily pick up bacteria and transfer it someplace where you could make a person really, really sick. So that's just my little warning about anal intercourse. The other thing is the rectum is not really designed to be penetrated. So yes, it can stretch, but it doesn't have any kind of lubrication that naturally occurs. And so anal intercourse requires lubrication. It is really easy to tear the rectum. It's very thin skin and has a lot of blood flow to it. And so if you have a tear in the rectum, it gives you an opening into the bloodstream really easily for introducing bacteria and things that can kill you. I mean, like, you can get septic and die pretty quickly. So it's really super important that that adequate lubrication is always used if anybody ever attempts anal intercourse. Okay, so that's enough on that. Let's go ahead and let's go ahead and check where I am. Yeah, let's go ahead and take a break, and then we'll come back to coitus.